Lighting a scene primarily with practical lights can be a little bit tricky. You have to really be aware of where your light's going to fall and how you're going to keep the light out of areas that you want to fall into shadow, therefore creating interesting contrast within your image. In this video, I want to break down some frames from a recent PSA commercial that I shot and discuss how we lit the entire thing practically.
Sorry, I just got here.
You'll be having this.
What are you doing?
I mean, you didn't say no.
Excuse me?
How can I help you?
Your server just spilled food on me.
So you're accusing Tanya, our best waitress?
Going into this shoot, we scouted a handful of different diner locations, but when we ended up at the one we actually used, we just knew that it was right immediately. There was these poppy colors, there were cool elements in the space like the booths, the checkerboard floor, and what really caught my eye were these overhead lighting fixtures. They just had a lot of character to them, and with that, it kind of set my mind on a path of how could we light this space practically. You know, these lights would need to be visible in the shot, so they actually would need to emit light, and we would need to be able to create shape on our characters so that they still looked good and the shot had that cinematic quality to it. And so I worked through a lighting plan in a software I used called Satellite 3D that allows you to build out a space and put real fixtures in there to see how they'll behave on your subjects. And after a bit of testing, it became really clear that this was a viable option and created a whole different way that we could shoot in the space because we were not relying on fixtures that we'd have to move around from shot to shot. Working with the director Caleb Hansen, we came up with a visual style and overall tone we wanted for the piece and pulled a few specific shots that we found on FrameSet that felt like this is the mood that we want. The diner itself is supposed to represent the judicial system and how survivors of abuse are pushed aside. And with that, we wanted to light the whole thing a bit more moody, not super commercial looking. Everybody doesn't have a perfect eye light. Sometimes you'll get some raccooning in the eyes and just shadows being okay, not shying away from the darkness. We also wanted something that felt gritty, kind of filmic, and surreal. We shot this spot on the Sony Venice 2, which we had used for one of the other PSAs we shot for this same campaign, and I fell in love with this camera. It is such a beast. I think what lent itself to this particular idea of lighting practically was the dual base ISO. So you can go up to 3200 ISO and your noise floor drops out again and you get a fairly clean image, but you get much more sensitivity on your sensor. And this meant that all of our smaller fixtures that we'd have to use to light this practically would just pack that much more of a punch. Partnered with the Venice, we wanted to shoot anamorphic. Caleb was really stoked on the idea of using this to push it into more of a surreal vibe and create just a mood that you couldn't replicate as easily with spherical glass. Now, when we were picking out lenses, we tested a whole bunch at the local rental house, and we ended up settling on the Atlas Orion series. Some of the other ones we tested were too flary, or they just had really strange distortion and were just generally too weird for what we wanted. For some pieces, I think they would be absolutely incredible. Another thing that we needed was minimal vignetting. We're shooting on a full frame camera, but we're using Super 35 glass. Now, fortunately, with the 16:9 crop, a lot of that vignetting was pushed outside of our frame, but the Atlas Orion series were the cleanest across the board. So we didn't need to zoom in at all in post. We didn't need to use a focal expander. We were able to get the full field of view of those lenses really within our 16:9 crop and make sure that we could pull off some of the wider shots that were going to be in this piece. So now I want to break down a couple frames from this spot and discuss how we use practical lighting as our primary light source. So we'll start with this shot here. It is our wide and really allows us to see the majority of the lighting that we are using in the space. Before we even started, we dropped rags outside all the windows of the space. So in terms of what we're working with here, this was the general sort of shape. We had a door here, and then this is all windows. We have our talent here, and the bar is here, and we have some windows here. And so we dropped a tent outside here, and we also tented this whole area here, and we had a rag inside here to block any light coming in through the door. So we had the space completely put into darkness before we started. Now, before we get into any more specifics, let's talk about how we got the camera into this position. As I mentioned before, we are shooting with the Venice 2, and we have that on top of a Peewee dolly. I had never used a dolly before. I was recommended that it might actually speed up our workflow, and it surely did. Working over top of the counter with sticks would be kind of a nightmare, and there was a handful of positions we needed to be able to raise the camera up and down into fairly quickly. And so this just meant that we could drive the camera into position, raise and lower the head where it needed to be, kind of float it over top of the counter. And so that's what we're using here. We have a riser on it as well, just to get the camera as close to the ceiling as possible and tilted down. We're on the 25mm, ISO 3200. Our white balance is 4300 Kelvin. So that's our base setup that we're working with. We were able to get some of these cool foreground lights, create some leading lines into our subject, and just have a frame that makes her look small within the space. That was a real important consideration as we cut between different angles. Anytime we showed our victim of this abuse, we're higher up looking down on her, making her look small. Anytime we're showing the perpetrators, we're low looking up at them. Within each of the lighting fixtures, we replace that with our own lights. So we just put a controllable bulb in all of these. I don't remember what bulb that was, but basically all of these lights had controllable bulbs inside them. This first set here of 4 closest to the talent, those were all at one level of intensity. We dropped this one here into another level of intensity, probably 5% lower. And then this one closest to camera here was probably another 5% lower in intensity. And that was just to help draw attention to our talent. The ones over top of the booths back here, those ones were all set lower, again, to try to focus that attention on our main scene so you didn't have any questions of where you were looking. With this overhead lighting setup, if we just threw these lights in here alone, we would just be getting light going everywhere. We wouldn't have very much shape on our subject. So what we ended up doing is we came in behind these lights, and in this space, on the back side of this light, the back side of this light, the back side of this light, and I think we may have even put some here on the back side of that light, we put black wrap. And what this did is it allowed us to see the light to camera. Everything was illuminated, but we controlled where that spill was going. So we didn't have any light falling directly on our talent here. We wanted to create that shape on her face, that little bit of darkness. This was a simple trick that our gaffer came up with, and it worked super well, and we were able to actually rotate these globes depending on the shot, and this is how we could control the shape for the different angles that we were shooting. Worked incredible, but this was the hardest shot to get some shape on our subject because it was such a wide image and we couldn't really bring in any other solids to control that light. In addition to those light sources, we had an MC back in here in this cooler. There was an MC up in this area here. Overhead here, you'll be able to see it in the next frame a bit more clearly. We had 2 quasar tubes attached to the wall. Outside of the diamond-shaped windows back here, we had quasar tubes as well. And those are just kind of trying to create some street light sort of effect. Because we had tinted that entire area, we needed to do something to bring some level into those windows. And the whole idea with doing this during the day and tenting the space was so that we didn't have to shoot overnight. It's a lot nicer for the crew and everybody involved to be able to shoot during the day. And so we wanted to simulate night without having to shoot overnight. But with that, Caleb felt like the space was a little bit dead, which we didn't have any sort of moving lights. You think about yourself inside of a diner at night and you're going to have traffic going by and lights sweeping through the space. And so we ended up going with a couple animated lights in the space. We didn't want to do too many because there could be a continuity complexity that would be problematic down the line. But we ended up having one that was off camera over here. And this is the one that's causing this bit of blue on her shirt. You can see the blue here You can see the blues on these two spots here. Basically, we would just sweep this light through the frame at a particular moment of the dialogue every time we ran the scene. And it created this sort of cast that wiped across her face. We had another light outside and it would sweep through all of these windows at one point. So we just had it wipe across the windows and again created that sort of car driving by, adding just a tiny bit of life to the space. And it was subtle, but I do think it made a substantial difference in just the believability of the shot. A couple other fixtures that are maybe a little bit less noticeable but are doing work in this shot is there is a tube somewhere back here that's just bringing some light into this little bathroom hallway space. And then there's also in this kitchen window, which you'll be able to see in the next shot better, there is, I believe a 600 was in there, just filling that space in, bringing some level up there because otherwise it was complete darkness. So here is the other shot I want to break down. This one was also shot on the 25mm. Camera settings are basically the same. We brought the dolly in over top of the counter and just brought it as close to her as we could. This was a shot from the very beginning of this piece that I wanted to create. I like how it distorts the face. You know, she is our perpetrator in this. And so we wanted to create that weirdness in the way that her face looks. I absolutely love this shot. It's one of my favorite shots I've ever done. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. First of all, the space and the talent and the wardrobe work so well together. You know, we've got the teal background and then the blue eyes are just like really poppy. And then we've got the red within the space, her red wardrobe, all of that is working together, her red hair. So it just creates this really complementary image that's really dynamic feeling. Now, in addition to that, there's one other thing that I did not notice until I got this home on the computer that I think is why I love this shot. And I think it's because we lit it practically that this was possible. If you look really close at her eyes, you see this eye light that has 4 individual points in it. And those are those 4 overhead lights that we lit the scene with. If you didn't use practical lights and you had lit this with a big soft source off to the side of the camera, you would be getting this really large light and it just wouldn't look real. It wouldn't be believable and it wouldn't be as dynamic as these point sources of light. We're also getting these interesting pops of light on her lips. We're getting it there as well. You know, we're getting that eye light. And we're getting even interesting pops in the background. You know, we have some of these things here that are just catching these light sources that, because it's practical, it's giving us a more realistic representation of that lighting than if we used a big soft source. Now, the other thing that I think is really working well for us in this shot is the mix of light and dark. So we've got this dark edge over here, and then we have a sort of a lighter spot here in the middle. Then we're going to another dark with the shadow side of her face, getting pop of light here, and then finally more darkness over here. And so we're just creating this peppering of light and dark that creates a dynamic image, pulls the viewer in. Now, on that note of pulling a viewer in, pull these things off here. Another thing I think is really working well for this image is we've got great leading lines. Everything is just pointing us right to our subject. All of these lines are saying, you know, look right here. Let's just talk through a couple of the other lighting fixtures that we're seeing here. Most of this, as before, was the same. I think we had a source here and then another source that's like kind of closer to camera here. We would have probably cut this one out, and that's how we're kind of getting this darkness back here. But this closer one is still on, I believe, but we have rotated the black wrap side to not have it be so overpowering. We probably even lowered the levels a little bit. And then we've got those 4 light sources out of frame, you know, working our way down the bar overhead that are creating our main light source and creating that nice little catch light that we're seeing in her eye there. In addition to that, some light sources that you couldn't really see before. Here's the quasars in the back. We've got 2 MCs, I believe these were MC Pros, that are tucked up and under this little entryway into the kitchen, just creating some light on the countertop there. The whole window here is being illuminated by, I believe it was a 600 back here that's just firing at the ceiling, just kind of creating some fill into that space. We've got a little MC tucked in here inside this little cubby area, just bringing some light into this area. We've got that MC inside this cooler. It's creating some light. We might have brought in a big solid here just to further control the light on her and make this sort of like a really contrasty looking image. I don't remember if we did that, but regardless, we were trying to create shape on her face by the right side of the frame having less light and the other side of the frame having most of the light coming from that direction. So that is a quick breakdown of how we lit this scene practically. I am so proud of this piece. I couldn't have done it without the incredible team we had together. Caleb did an amazing job of bringing this idea to life, and I just feel so fortunate to have been able to work on this project. There are 3 other spots associated with this campaign. They're all for a client called We Ride Together. They're an organization in the States working to end sexual abuse within sport. And it was just an absolute pleasure having the opportunity to create so many different feelings, so many different looks for their campaign. You can see all the different spots we created on my Instagram. I'll be doing a breakdown of all of them over the next month or so. I just thought this one was a particularly interesting one to look at because I think it's pretty neat that we're able to do this with practical lighting, and yeah, just really proud of it. So thank you all for being here. I appreciate you all watching the channel and following along. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.